Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Automating Business Operations, Build n8n Workflows that do the work for you. I'm Gabriela Wittke, a Senior Product Marketing Manager here at Decodo, and I'll be your host. Today's session will consist of 3 parts. First, you'll hear a presentation by the n8n representative on best automation practices. Then, I'll lead a practical hands-on workshop where I'll demonstrate 5 different workflows and how to build them for IT, security, and marketing operations. And finally, we'll have a live Q&A session where you can ask your questions in the chat. Let's get started with the first part and invite August Kaknevičiūtė, Senior Enterprise Account Executive at n8n. Hi, August. It's so nice to have you here.
Hi, Gabriela. Thanks for having me.
So without further delay, let's hear what you have to share with us.
Okay, so really excited to join Decodo today for this webinar. We'll be diving into workflow automation, and I'll share a few learnings and best practices we have gathered from the thousands of teams building with n8n. So I want to zoom out for a second. We're in a moment where automation together with AI is really reshaping how teams and businesses operate. And I'm not just saying that. My job includes every single day talking to CTOs, VPs of engineering, and newly appointed heads of AI that are really bringing amazing impact to their organization. And tasks that used to take hours or required multiple teams can now be completed in seconds. And this is allowing small teams to deliver at the scale of a much larger organizations. And it's not just about cost savings, it's about unlocking speed, focus, and really sometimes completely new possibilities. But here is the challenge. Most teams want automation, but getting there can be kind of tricky. And I probably don't need to tell this audience that systems that we use are very fragmented and tools do not talk to each other. And building automations usually requires engineering resources who are already pretty stretched thin. And that's why 74% of teams, do struggle to get value from the automation initiatives. And it's not because automation doesn't work, it's because implementation is just too slow, costs too much, and it is way too dependent on a few people. And this is exactly the problem n8n was built to solve. So n8n is a workflow automation platform that gives technical superpowers basically to anyone with a computer. And for technical teams, it's about the ability to move fast, really without needing to write full applications or thousands of lines of code whenever they want to automate a process. So you can really think of n8n as the glue between your apps, your internal systems, and your business logic. It really combines the flexibility of code with the speed of no code. So you're never really blocked by the limitations of the tool itself. And it's not just about building workflows, it's about running them at scale in production. And that's why n8n includes everything you need to go from idea to live automation. So you can see here kind of a laid out summary, right? You can plug in any integrations, any LLMs you're using. It has all the security features you may require. You can self-host or host it on the cloud, deploy across multiple environments, monitor, have insights, alerting, etc. So it's a great enterprise tool, but one of the things that I love most about it is incredible community behind it. So it's worth highlighting n8n has a completely free self-hosted version of n8n under a fair code license agreement. And n8n is one of the fastest growing GitHub projects of all time. So we've got over 150,000 GitHub stars, definitely more now than 250,000 active users, an incredible amount of ambassadors on YouTube. So we see new contributions every week, new notes, new templates, new examples. And if you're using n8n, the community is an amazing resource to learn from and build with. I love our template library. I recommend a lot of the teams starting there. Even though n8n started as an automation platform, it became kind of a de facto platform for building AI agents over the last couple of years. So you will see more than half of these templates has agentic workflow capabilities with MCP servers and such. So another thing why I believe community loves the tool so much is really an amazing UX. And I think that's something that Gabriela will dive in a moment and show you exactly how the canvas looks like and how the what we call a flowgramming looks like. But second, it connects to your entire stack. So whether you're working with GitHub, Jira, Slack, Notion, Salesforce, your internal APIs, it all connects here. And if we don't have a node, you can simply use an HTTP request and make it yours. So we design n8n to feel fast. Like even for experienced developers, the visual builder makes it easy to get started. But behind every node is full control. So expressions, custom logic, reusable functions. So you can insert JavaScript or Python, call in PM packages, or even use AI to generate logic for you. But again, you only use code if you want to. Many of our users built full automations without ever touching it. So super flexible AI capabilities and an incredible UX. Like that's what I think really makes it quite special. And before I wrap up, I wanted to share a few best practices we've seen work across, again, thousands of n8n users, from individual contributors to really enterprise teams. And these will not be about some sort of like a flashy use cases. They're really just about building automations that last and are easy to scale. So first of all, highly suggest start simple. Like it's tempting to automate the entire world right away, but the best results come from starting with one specific painful workflow, something manual, repetitive, and that causes high friction. So think things like exporting CSVs, triaging alerts, syncing systems, and just kind of try to win trust with a quick win. And then layer in more complexity over time. Second, make it modular. Like don't copy paste logic between workflows. Use subflows to separate concerns. Maybe like enrichment, alerting, error handling. We've seen customers build entire internal libraries of sub workflows, so teams can plug and play pieces. Kind of helps to reduce the bugs, make onboarding easier, and just kind of enforce this consistency across the organization. But also don't overuse sub workflows. It can make debugging a little bit more complex, but definitely make use of it. Third, try to build with observability in mind. Like a failed automation that doesn't tell anyone it failed is probably worse than no automation at all. So add, error branching, maybe status reporting, manual triggers for reprocessing, and, optionally log to something like Postgres or CloudWatch if you want to have a more kind of persistent traceability. Especially for SecOps and compliance-related workflows, as you can imagine, observability is everything there. Involve the team. Like we say this a lot, automation works best when it's collaborative. So use Git version control. So you're not editing directly in production. Document workflows, use naming conventions. Even in small teams, like the moment someone else needs to touch your workflow, your documentation becomes the onboarding. And last but not least, track outcomes, not just workflows. So make sure you connect automation to business outcomes. Like don't just say, we automated something, like show that it reduced MTTR, saved analyst hours, improved campaign responses times. That's really what builds momentum. It unlocks the budgets and really gets stakeholders on your side. So if there's one takeaway from today, is this: like, treat your workflows like production code, built for clarity, for resilience, and for handoff. And they'll scale with your team and will not work against it.
That was very interesting and insightful. Thank you so much for sharing and being here with us.
Yeah, no problem at all. For the audience, like, feel free to find me on LinkedIn. I'd love to connect, bounce back ideas, and talk all things automation strategy.
Okay, so now we've heard how you can use n8n to optimize your workflows. I think it's time to put everything into practice. Before we start, note that our Decodo node has the functionality of our advanced web scraping API. There are specific templates for some of the web scraping targets, or you can use the universal scraper by entering URL as a query. You can also target specific geolocations, and for some targets, you may get parsed output, such as JSON or Markdown. As I mentioned before, we'll build 5 workflows for IT, security, and marketing use cases. So let's get started. If you want to join me in building workflows either now or when we release the webinar's recording, know that we have a free plan for the web scraping API with 5,000 requests. Or if you've already used it, you can get 30% off any advanced plan with a coupon SCRAPE30. Okay, let's get started. So we're going to start with the first workflow, which is a SaaS outage tracker. For that, we're going to scrape status pages of multiple tools and check for outages. Then we'll generate a summary report and have it sent to our email. In this workflow, to track outages, we want to get data from multiple status pages. So first, we need to have all of the websites in one place. You can either create this list in Google Sheets, which I'll show you in the next workflow, or we can do that directly in n8n. So firstly, you'll need to go to the Data Tables tab and create a new data table. In our case, we have already created one for you. So here you'll need to add 2 columns, so one for the service name, one for the status URL, and then by adding rows just here at the bottom, you can just add the details for the service status pages that you want to track. For this example, we'll be using Slack, Google Cloud, and Cloudflare. Now let's create the actual workflow. Now to start off, we'll be adding a manual trigger node. Now this node will basically let us start the workflow every time we click on the Execute Workflow button. Then we'll add a data table and choose Get Rows. Now with this node, we'll be collecting the list of the services that we've just created before to the actual workflow. So you can leave the resources row, operation is get, and then just choose the data table you just created from the list. Then we can execute the step and return to the canvas. Now let's add our Decodo node to scrape the status pages and get data on the outages. So we'll be selecting the Decodo node and then choosing the universal target. Now in the node, you're going to need to connect your Decodo account and keep the target as universal. Now for the URL part, from the input panel under the schema view, just select the status URL and drop it into the box. Now here we'll also enable JavaScript rendering, and you can also set your preferred geolocation. So in our case, we'll be using United States. And then finally, under settings, let's just enable continuing on workflow. Now we can execute the step and return to the canvas. Now to parse the information, let's add an edit fields node. Now here we'll be manually mapping all of these fields by just simply dragging them and dropping them into the box. So let's start with the data fields. Here we're going to need the service name and the status URL. And then from under the Decodo node, Let's select content, status code, and URL. And then we can continue with the workflow and return to the canvas. Now, let's use AI to check for outage warnings. Please note that if you don't want to use AI tokens for this, you could just write a custom code that will do the same for you. But for simple setup, let's just use OpenAI by adding an OpenAI node and choosing message model. Now, much like with the Decodo node, you're going to need to connect with your credentials. Then you can just leave the resource as text and operation as message a model. Here we'll be choosing the model that we prefer to work with, and in our case, we're using the GPT 4.1 mini. Now, under messages, just leave the type as text and role as user, and just drag the content piece into the prompt section. Now, we'll also be enabling simplify output, and under options, just add custom instructions. So here you'll need to tell the model what you want it to do. So what you can do is you can either use the instructions that we've prepared by using our workflow template, or you can just generate it with AI. Now let's continue with a step and then return to the canvas. Now, next up, we're going to need to parse the JSON string returned by the AI into actual usable fields. So to do that, we'll add a code block and choose JavaScript. Now, you can either use the Ask AI function to generate the code for you, or you can write it manually. Now, what we need the code to do is to find the AI's output, parse it as JSON, and pull out two values: status flag for outages and a summary text. If the AI returns invalid data or the parsing fails, it logs the error and sets safe defaults so the workflow doesn't break. Then it returns everything with these new fields added. And now we can go back to the canvas. And next up, we'll add an edit fields node to basically combine our script information with the AI summary into one data pool. So firstly, we'll need to map a few of them from under the edit fields option. So we'll be dragging and dropping the service name and status URL, as well as the status code. And then we can move on to the code part, and then just add the outage flag and AI summary here as well. Now we can run this and return to the canvas. And next up, we'll need to actually convert the data into an HTML table for easier formatting and reading. So for that, we're adding an HTML node and choosing Convert to HTML table. Now let's just run the step and we can move on. And finally, we want to send an email to our email inbox with the data that we've pulled. So for that, we're adding a Gmail node and choosing Send a Message. Now, much like before, you'll need to connect with your credentials, and then you can leave the resource as message and operation as send. Here, you're going to want to add the email address you want to receive the email to. And then add a subject line. We're adding SaaS outage tracker. And then choose the email type as HTML. Now for the actual message part, you're just going to need to drag and drop the table inside of the message box. Now, if at any point you don't see any of the input data here under schema, you should be able to see an execute previous node button. And when you click that, you're going to get the data filled in here. And there we have it, a full workflow where we scrape the status pages, collect the info, summarize it, and then send it to our inbox. So now let's just execute the entire workflow. Here you might need to give it a minute for the scraping task to finish and for the AI to process the data. Now, once the workflow is executed, you should get an email into your inbox with the information that we've scraped, collected, and summarized. Now, for the second workflow, we'll create a release notes tracker and analysis tool. So the tool will scrape a number of GitHub repositories for new releases, analyze the release notes, and send a summary of relevant information to our email. Now, starting with the second workflow, we've pre-built them in advance to save some time. So firstly, we'll need to choose repositories we scrape. So I've set up this Google Sheet that has dedicated columns with repository owners, names, and more details. For bare minimum, you'll just need to have the full names. But extra details like notes about the repository will help you check what kind of repository it is and what changes are relevant. Now, going back to the workflow itself, we're going to start by scheduling a trigger. You're going to be able to set it at whatever interval you want. However, for now, let's keep it daily. Then you're going to add a Google Sheets node, select your account or connect it if it's not connected yet. Leave the resource as sheet within document and operation as get rows, and then select the document that you've just created and the sheet. Then just execute the step, and we can continue to the canvas. Now for scraping, we're going to add our Decodo node. Here you'll just select your account and leave the target as universal. For the URL, as we'll be targeting the API, you're going to need to add https://API github.com repos, then drag and drop the JSON name and add a /releases. And execute the step, and then you can go back to the canvas. Now let's connect the data from Google Sheets to the freshly scraped data from GitHub. So for that, you're going to add a merge node. The mode is set to combine by position and number of inputs. Let's leave that as 2. Now we can execute the step and return to canvas. Next up, we're going to need to parse the data. For this, we're going to add 3 pieces of code. Just make sure to name them differently so you can tell them apart and know what each piece of the code does. So for the first part, if you click on Show Data, you'll see the previous inputs. Here you can use this code example to generate your own parsing code using AI, or write the code yourself. But we'll also share the template so you can use it as our parsing instructions. With the following code, we go through each repository, check if the data is valid, and then pull out the release details like version numbers, titles, dates, and descriptions. If something goes wrong with a repository like missing data or a formatting error, it just skips that one and moves on to the next. At the end, you'll have a single list containing all the releases from all the repositories, neatly structured and ready to use. Now add another code node and choose code in JavaScript again. This code node will handle filtering the content from the last 24 hours. It starts by calculating what time it was exactly 1 day ago, then goes through each release checking its publication date. For every release that has a valid date and was published after that 1-day mark, it adds it to a new list. If no recent releases are found at all, the code returns an empty list, which stops this part of the workflow from continuing. Otherwise, it passes along only those fresh releases from the last day. Finally, let's add one more code node, again in JavaScript, for getting the latest release date and tag for each repository. It goes through all the releases and groups them by repository name, keeping track of which one has the latest publication date. For each repo, it stores important details like the release tag, the date, and when the check was performed. If it encounters a release with an invalid date, it just skips it. Once it's identified the newest release for every repository, it cleans up the data by removing the internal tracking information and returns a nicely formatted list showing each repository with only its most recent release. Now you see that the workflow branches out 2 ways. With the first branch, we'll generate a summary of releases that happened in the last 24 hours and send it to our email. With the second branch, we'll add the information to our Google Sheet so you can have everything in one place. For the email summary, we're going to add an OpenAI node and select Message Model. You're going to have to log in with your credentials here and select Text as Resource. And much like in the first workflow, you're going to select GPT-40 Mini for the model. Like with code, you can click on Execute Previous Nodes and copy the example output. Then paste it into ChatGPT and tell it that you want a summary in JSON and ask what should be your prompt to get that. Alternatively, you can just use our template that we've pre-built for you. Now we can go back to the canvas. And next up, we're going to need to clean the OpenAI output from Markdown input and reformat it into JSON. For that, we're going to add a code node and select JavaScript again. This code takes text output from an AI language model and converts it into usable email data. It removes the Markdown formatting that the AI often adds around responses and converts the clean text into JSON. Then it pulls out the email subject and body fields. If something goes wrong with parsing, it skips that item and continues. Finally, it returns all the extracted email data in a clean format for the next step. Next, we'll add a Markdown node. Select Markdown to HTML. Then, if you click on Execute Previous Nodes, you'll be able to drag the body element into the box. You can find the body element here in the schema part. Now we can return to the canvas. Now for the final step of the first part, you're going to want to add a Gmail node. Just connect your account here, set the resource to message and operation to send. Enter the email address you want to send the email to, and then drag and drop the subject and data to the boxes here. Finally, set the email type to HTML, and we can return back to the canvas. Now, to get updates via Google Sheets, you're going to want to add a Google Sheet node. Connect your account here, leave the resource in operation as preset, and then select the document and the sheet itself. Now, for data mapping, firstly, you're going to want to execute the previous nodes. Now, in the Values to Update section, just drag and drop the boxes for full name, latest release tag, release date, and last checked. And here you go, a full workflow built for you with 2 branches. Now, if we click on Execute Workflow, we'll now have both the Google Sheet updated, as well as an email received to our inbox with a summary. Now let's move on to the third workflow, where we're going to be building a phishing domain hunter. So the phishing domain hunter is a tool for efficiently catching domain and brand name squatters. From a list of domains similar to Decodo.com, we check each domain whether it exists or not. If the page is live, we calculate how similar it is to our own website and get a summary report directly to our email. So to run this workflow, we need to prepare a Google Sheet. With the help of AI, we generated a similar domain alternatives to Decodo.com. Then we listed all of these URLs in the first column and named it as domain. Next, you'll also need to create status, less checked, similarity score, recommendation, reason, and services found columns, and you can leave them empty. This is where the scraped data will go in automatically. Now, in this workflow, firstly, we're going to add a schedule trigger, and you can set it to run the workflow however often you want it to. In our case, we're leaving it to daily. Then we're going to add a Google Sheets node and select Get Rows in Sheet. Here, if you haven't yet, just connect your account, and under Documents, select the document that you're working with, as well as the sheet itself. Now, since the workflow will modify the domain field several times, we need to create a backup. So for that, let's add a simple JavaScript code to do that. So we're going to add a code node and select JavaScript. In this case, we've named it Preserve Domain Name, so we can tell the code nodes apart. This code loops through all of the items and copies the domain field from each one. It creates 2 identical fields, domain and original domain, storing the same value in both as a backup. Since we'll have many domain names and we want the process to be repeated for each domain in the list, let's add a loop over items node. As you can see, it's also called split in batches, so you can find it typing in whichever name you like. Next, let's do the domain scraping, and for that, we're going to add the Decodo node and choose Universal Target. Again, if you haven't yet, just connect your account, keep the target selected as Universal, And then for the URL part, since the domain list we generated doesn't have an HTTP prefix, let's start our URL with an HTTPS // and then we click on execute previous nodes, or here you can see it's called execute node. And then you can drag the domain item into the field. Make sure to enable JavaScript and select the geolocation, the one that you prefer. In this case, we're using United States. One more important thing to note for this node, under settings, you should enable continuing using error output on error. Now let's deal with non-existing, or as we call them, dead domains first. So we need to log all of them and label them properly. So to start with that, let's add an if node. And again, upon executing the previous nodes, in the schema markup, under results, you can just drag and drop it to the field. In the dropdown, just select array exists. Now let's add some custom code which will label inactive links as dead. For that, we're going to add a code node. Again, we're choosing JavaScript here. As usual, you can either ask AI to generate the code for you, or you can just use the example that we've provided in the template. So this code retrieves the original domain name from a previous node, then returns a structured object marking the domain as dead with a status reason of domain unreachable or API error. It also timestamps the check and sets the similarity score to 0. Then we're going to add a Google Sheets node and select Update Rows. In the node itself, again, select the document you're working with as well as the sheet, and then choose Map each column manually. And the column to match should be set to domain. Then we're just going to execute the previous nodes. And then in the values to update section, you can again drag and drop the domain, status, less checked, and similarity score to these fields. Now that we've dealt with the dead pages, let's create another sequence for live sites. So firstly, we'll need to extract the scraped data and make it easy for AI to understand and interpret. So for that, we're going to need to add a markdown node. Here, you're going to select HTML to markdown. And again, upon executing the previous steps, which we've already done just recently, we can drag the content element into the field. You can set the destination key to markdown, and under ignored elements, just add script, style, nav, footer, and iframe. Also enable place URLs at the bottom here. Next up, we're going to add a code node. Again, we're choosing JavaScript here, and you can, as usual, ask AI to generate the code for you. In this case, the code retrieves the original domain from a previous node, then loops through the items to extract the URL, markdown content, and status code from the scraped results. It combines the domain with the scraped data into new objects and returns them all together. The next step would be to message OpenAI and get the website analysis. Now, for every domain that's similar to ours, we need to know if it provides similar services, if it could cause brand confusion, and if there's any phishing indication. So for that, we're going to add an OpenAI node and choose Message a Model. If you haven't yet, just connect your OpenAI account. Then under Resources, set it to text and choose the preferred model. In this case, we're using GPT-4 Mini. Under Messages, leave the type as text and role as user. Now, for the prompt, it's important to pass the scraped data to the model and tell it to evaluate the given websites and whether they could be considered as phishing. And then finally, to give it specific guidelines on how you want the output to look like. Now, after we get our evaluation, let's parse the data in 2 steps so it would be compatible with Google Sheets formatting. First step, we're going to add a code node and, as usual, select JavaScript. Now, this code extracts JSON from different AI model responses. So it locates the text, strips markdown code blocks, and then parses it as JSON. Successfully parsed items are added to the results, while failed ones are logged and skipped, allowing the workflow to handle multiple AI providers. We've also renamed this one as Parse AI Analysis, so again, we can tell the code snippets apart. Then again, we're going to add another code node. And this piece processes domain items and standardizes their format. It loops through each item, marks the domain as live, adds a timestamp, and ensures fields like similarity score, recommendation, and reason have default values if they're missing. Now, lastly, let's add the parse data to Google Sheets. And for that, obviously, we're going to need to add a Google Sheets node and select Update Row in Sheet when adding it. Now, as usual, just connect your account, choose the document and the domain, and select Map each column manually. Again, we're matching it on domain. Then, under Values to Update, let's just drag the following items into the fields. So we have domain status, last check, similarity score, recommendation, reason, and services found. So with the current workflow, we'd already have the data on phishing domains pushed into the Google Sheet. But we could add one more step to create a report on the latest updates and have it sent to our email. So for that, again, we're adding a Google Sheets node and selecting Choose Rows. Here, as previously, just select the document and domain. And now let's filter the domains that were checked only today. So for that, we're adding a code node and choosing JavaScript. Again, we've renamed it to know what it means. Now, this code filters and deduplicates suspicious domains. So it basically loops through all of the items and keeps only those that were checked today that have a live status and also have a similarity score of 50 or higher. Now, using a set to track seen domains, it also ensures each domain only appears once in the final output, even if it appears in multiple times in the input. So what it returns is only unique high-risk domains from today. Now, next up, we can format the output into a neat HTML report. So to do this automatically, a good option is to copy the output from the previous notes and ask AI to generate the code for you for the formatting itself. Alternatively, again, adding a code node, choosing JavaScript, you can just copy and paste or reuse the template that we've built. Now, this code generates an HTML email for suspicious domains. It counts the filtered items, it creates a subject line with a count, and then it builds a styled HTML email with a header and loops through each domain to create formatted cards. Now, finally, it returns a single item containing the subject and body for the email node to send. Now, the last step is to add a Gmail node. We're going to add a Gmail node and select Send a Message. Again, we're connecting our account here, leaving to Message and Send, and then typing in the email we want to receive the report to. Then let's execute the previous nodes. And then just drag the subject and the body into the fields. And there you have it. With this workflow, we'll also receive an update to our Google Sheet, as well as an email report delivered directly to our inbox. So if we execute the workflow, you'll see that our Google Sheet has been updated with the results, as well as an email has been received to our inbox with a detailed report formatted neatly in HTML. For the fourth workflow, we'll be creating a CVEs report scraper. With this scraper, we connect a Linux server and retrieve the list of installed packages. Then we compare them against Debian's vulnerability database to identify security issues. Finally, we generate a severity sorted report and have it sent to us via email. The main idea of this workflow is to get automated common vulnerabilities and exposures reports on your set schedule. So here we're going to start by adding a schedule trigger and adjust the settings as you prefer. In this case, we've adjusted it so it runs daily. Then we'll need to connect to the server, check the existing packages, and scan it for vulnerabilities. There is a dedicated SSH node for executing commands, which makes the process easier. So here you're going to add an SSH node and choose Execute a Command. Add your login details to access the server, which can be done either with a private key or via password. Let's leave command under resource and execute under operation. In the command field, you'll put in your command in bash script format, which would run by a terminal if we were doing the CVE scan manually. Here, the security vulnerability report prints the report title. The date part prints the current date, server hostname, and uptime. The disk space part shows disk usage for the root file system. The CVE vulnerabilities part scans for vulnerabilities and then counts the total number of them. The remotely exploitable part scans again and counts how many lines contains the phrase remotely exploitable. The top 20 CVEs part shows the first 20 lines of vulnerability output, and the system status part checks if the file exists, and if yes, then prints a warning. If no, it confirms that no reboot is needed. Now we need to parse the output returned by the SSH node. Also, we want to filter different vulnerabilities by their severity. For this, the easiest way is to write a custom code, but you can also use n8n's AI assistant to write the instructions for you. For that, we're going to add a code node and choose JavaScript. This JavaScript code parses the SSH command output and converts it into structured data. It searches for specific patterns like uptime, total vulnerabilities, and reboot required to extract relevant information. After collecting the data, it assigns an alert severity level ranging from critical to OK based on vulnerability counts, reboot status, and disk usage. Finally, it returns everything as a clean JSON object with fields like timestamp, vulnerability counts, alert level, and Boolean flags. After parsing the data, let's filter only the packages that have vulnerabilities. For that, we'll add an if node. And within the if node, let's execute the previous steps and then drag the has issues item into the field. Under the dropdown, let's select Boolean is true. Now let's finish our workflow by creating an email report about detected vulnerabilities. For that, we're going to add a Gmail node and choose Send a Message. Here, you're going to want to connect your Google account, set the resource to message and operation to send. Enter the email address you want to receive the email to here. For the subject line, either enter a fixed email subject or include elements like the ones that show the number of vulnerabilities from the schema panel to make it more informative. For the email type, in this example, we'll write HTML formatting instructions within the Gmail node to show how the output could be customized. Here, we've prepared HTML formatting instructions beforehand. This script includes some elements from previous nodes, ensuring our CVEs reports are up to date and formatted in an easy-to-read way. As the last step, we're going to add a no operation node that's going to be connected to the if node, which will complete the workflow. Now, upon clicking Execute Workflow, we're going to receive an email alert to the provided email address, which will show the vulnerabilities. For the fifth and final workflow, we'll be building a brand mentions tool. We provide a list of relevant product keywords, and on a set time frequency, the workflow scrapes Google search results for these keywords. Then we take the collected URLs and check each page's content. In this content, we look for brand mentions and generate a list of these mentions with a brief description of how our brand was mentioned in each of the texts. All right, now to get started with this workflow, we'll first need to create a Google Sheet with a single sheet called Keywords and list the keywords in separate rows. Now for the workflow itself, first we'll add a schedule trigger node and choose a specific time when we want the workflow to activate. Now, next up, we need to retrieve the sheet. So for that, we're adding an HTTP request node. For the method, let's select get. For the URL, let's type in the URL of our sheet in a Google API structure. For authentication, we're selecting predefined credential type and choosing the Google Sheets authentication here. Now, here you just need to connect your account. Then we need to extract the sheet names. So for that, we're adding a split out node. And under fields to split out, let's select sheets. Now, next we want to make sure that only the latest information is included in the file. So we'll create a workflow that with each activation will delete old sheets and then create new ones with updated data. So for that, we're adding an if statement node and adding a condition and setting it as an expression. Then upon executing the previous nodes, we can get the property field and just drag it into the box. Here we're going to choose is not equal to and type in keywords. Now let's create a flow that will delete the old sheets. So for that, we're adding a loop over items node and setting the batch size as 1. Next up, we're adding a Google Sheets node and choosing delete sheet from the node options. Again, if you haven't yet, just connect your Google account here, choose sheet within document, and then leave delete as the operation, and just select the document that you're working with. Then again, we're going to execute the previous nodes, and then just drag the sheet ID element into the box. Now, make sure that the nodes are connected, so we're adding a loop connection here. Now, continuing from the if statement, let's create the workflow that gets new data and then adds it to the sheet. So firstly, we're adding a merge node, setting the mode to append. For the number of inputs, here we're just going to select 2 and make sure that the node is connected to both the if node and also the loop over items node. Then next up, we're adding a Google Sheets node and selecting get rows. Now for the document, again, let's just select the document that we've created and the sheet that we've created as well. Now next up is the actual keyword scraping part. So with a loop over items, we take the keywords one by one and then pass them over to our scraper. So firstly, as I've mentioned, we're adding a loop over items node and again setting the batch size to 1. And then we're adding our Decodo node. So here, just connect with your Decodo account and then set the target as Google Search. Now for the query, let's execute the previous nodes. And then we can just drag the keywords element into the box. Now for this node, we're enabling both JavaScript rendering and parsing and setting the geolocation to United States. However, here you can choose your preferred geolocation as well. For the results, let's leave it at 10. And then under settings, let's enable retry on fail. Now heading back to the canvas, again, let's make sure that everything's connected properly. So loop over items needs to be connected to Decodo, and then we need another loop connection here. Then next up, we're going to need to extract the sheet names. So for that, we're adding a split out node and executing the previous nodes. Now we need to find the elements we want to scrape and specify a path to them. So in this case, we're interested in organic results only. So we're going to go to the results class, then go to content, results again, and find organic. So our path should look something like this. Now let's return to the canvas. And as the next step, we're going to be adding an edit fields node. So here we're choosing manual mapping and then executing the nodes to get the data we can drag in here. So firstly, from under the Google Sheet info, we're going to need to drag the keywords into the box and then just expand the extract data part. And from there, you're just going to need the position, URL, title, and description. So you can drag all of these into the fields. Now, if we needed only SEO ranking positions, we could stop here, but the next step is to actually check each URL and look for brand mentions. So as August has mentioned before, one of the best automation strategies is to create subflows so we don't break the actual main flow. So let's create a new sub workflow. To start off here, we're adding an execute sub workflow node, and from triggers, just choose when executed by another workflow. Then we're adding a loop over items node, and as previously, we're leaving the batch size as 1. And then we're adding a Decodo node, just again connecting with your Decodo account. However, this time we're using the universal target. And for the expression, we're just going to use the JSON URL expression. And with it, each of our scraped URLs from the main workflow will be passed through the scraper. Again, here we're enabling JavaScript rendering and using the same geolocation we've used before. In addition, under settings, we're going to enable continuing using error output here. And now finally, we're adding a code node, again using JavaScript here. And now we need to add custom code that will basically parse the data and extract the keywords. So you'll just be able to copy the code, as we will share the templates after the webinar. But you can also just generate these instructions using AI. Now let's make sure that all of our nodes are connected properly. So there has to be a loop branch between the loop over items and Decodo node. We also have to have a success branch. As you can see, we've named them so we can tell them apart easily. So we need to have a success branch between Decodo and the code node, and then an error branch that returns from the Decodo node back to the loop over items node. Now we can return back to the main workflow. So our next step would be to connect the main workflow with a sub-workflow. So for that, we're adding an execute sub-workflow node, choosing the sources database, and then selecting the sub-workflow that we've just created. For the mode, let's set it to run once with all items. Now we're adding a merge node to connect the data from our first scraping action and the data from our sub-workflow scraping action. Now here for the mode, we're going to select combine. By combine by, we're choosing matching fields, and then fields to match, just typing in URL. For the output type, we're using enrich output 2. Now let's make sure, again, our nodes are connected properly. So both of these nodes need to be connected to the edit fields node. And for the final steps, let's add 2 final nodes to create a new sheet for each keyword and then scrape the scraped data to these sheets. So first we're adding a Google Sheets node and choosing create sheet. Here you're just going to want to log in with your Google credentials. And for the resource, select sheet within document. The operation will automatically be selected as create, and then you can just choose the document that you've created. Then for the next step, we'll need to execute the previous nodes. And then just drag the keyword element into the field. Now again, make sure these 2 are connected as well. And then for the final node, we're adding another Google Sheets node and choosing append row in sheet. Now here, as previously, we're logging in with our Google credentials, setting the resource to sheet within document, leaving the operation as default, and selecting the document from the list. Now for the sheet itself, let's select by name and then execute the previous nodes. And then we're going to drag the keyword element into the field. For the mapping column mode, let's select map automatically. Now we can return to the canvas and make sure these 2 nodes are connected. And there you have it, a full brand mentions workflow with an additional sub-workflow created just within several minutes. Now, when you click on execute workflow, now you can check your keywords sheet and you'll see that there are different tabs created with the results based on your keywords. That's it for today's hands-on workshop. Now it's your turn to explore. Try out the workflows yourself and see what you can build. Quick reminder, for Decodo Web Scraping API, you can grab a free trial with 5,000 requests. And if you've already used it, enter the code SCRAPE30 at checkout for 30% off any advanced plan. If you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. We'll be sticking around for the next 15 to 20 minutes to answer as many as we can. You can also join our Discord community to connect with other n8n users and check out our newest workflow templates. The invite link is right there in the chat. Thanks again for joining, and we hope to see you at our next webinar.